in the golden dust of San Pazel Valley, within a sanctuary built for wild and broken creatures, an adventurous German shepherd puppy wandered away from his owners during a hike near the sanctuary. Lost and confused, the puppy followed intriguing scents and unfamiliar trails, inadvertently slipping through a narrow gap in the sanctuary's perimeter. Kruger, an older bobcat known for his gentle yet solitary nature, immediately sensed the intruder. As the massive predator descended, silent as death itself, the staff can only watch in horror, bracing for the inevitable brutal end. But what happens next defies all logic, every law of nature. An act so unexpected, so tender, it would spark a journey that would test every rule and leave everyone who witnessed it in tears. What truly happened between the lonely predator and the lost puppy? The answer will change everything you thought you knew about the animal world. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The dust of the San Pascal Valley, a fine golden powder, settled on everything. It coated the leaves of the hardy manzanita bushes, dusted the roofs of the animal enclosures, and clung to the brim of Arthur Finley's worn baseball cap. For 40 years, Art had been the steady hand, the calm heart of the San Pasqual Wildlife Sanctuary. At 72, his face was a road map of laugh, lines and worry creases etched by decades of California sun and the countless lives feathered, furred, and scaled that had passed through his care. The sanctuary wasn't a zoo. There were no brightly colored signs, no popcorn stands, no crowds of noisy tourists. It was a place of healing, a refuge for the broken, the orphaned, and the misunderstood creatures of the American Southwest. It was a place of quiet purpose, where the primary sounds were the rustle of wind through the sycamores, the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk, and the soft padding of paws on dry earth. And in the heart of the sanctuary, in a spacious rockstone habitat designed to mimic the chaparral-covered hillsides of his birth, lived Kruger. Kruger was a bobcat, and a magnificent one at that. His coat was a masterpiece of muted earth tones, tawny brown, soft gray, and stark black that allowed him to melt into the shadows. His tufted ears swiveled independently, catching the faintest whisper of a field mouse, and his eyes, the color of aged whiskey, held a deep, abiding intelligence. But Kruger's magnificence was tinged with a permanent melancholy. He had come to the sanctuary a decade earlier, his hind leg mangled in a poacher's trap. Dr. Evans, the sanctuary's pragmatic and brilliant veterinarian, had saved the leg, but it had never healed quite right. Kruger walked with a slight rolling limp, a constant reminder of the cruelty that had stolen his wild freedom. He was a king in a gilded cage, and the weight of his crown was loneliness. Art and his small team, especially the young and fiercely compassionate zoologist Sarah Jenkins, did everything they could for him. They provided enrichment, varied his diet, and spoke to him in low, soothing tones. Kruger tolerated their presence with a detached dignity, but he formed no bonds. He was a solitary creature by nature, and his injury had deepened that instinct into a fortress of isolation. He would watch the world from the highest rock in his enclosure, his gaze distant as if seeing a horizon he could never reach. It was on a Tuesday morning in Late spring. A morning so still you could hear the buzz of a hummingbird's wings. From 50 feet away that the quiet of the sanctuary was shattered. The breach was not loud, not an explosion or a crash, but a tiny, whimpering sound. So out of place it was immediately alarming. Sarah was the first to hear it. During her morning rounds, her brow furrowed. It wasn't the cry of a kit fox or a coyote pup. It was domestic. She followed the sound, her heart beginning to pound a nervous rhythm against her ribs. It led her down the dusty path, past the coyote rehabilitation pen, past the eagle aviary, and towards the far corner of the grounds, towards Kruger's habitat. A cold dread washed over her. The whimpering was coming from inside the Bobcat enclosure. She scrambled up the observation platform, her binoculars fumbling in her trembling hands. Scanned the enclosure, her eyes darting from the shaded den to the sun-drenched rocks. And then she saw it, huddled at the base of Kruger's favorite sunning rock was a small, trembling ball of black and tan fur. A puppy, a German shepherd puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, all paws and ears and terrified saucer-like eyes, and descending from the rock, silent as a falling shadow, was Kruger. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her blood ran cold. This was the ultimate nightmare scenario. Defenseless domestic animal, a baby in with a wild predator. A predator who, despite his limp, was still a perfectly honed killing machine. She fumbled for her radio, her voice a choked whisper. Art code read at the Bobcat enclosure. There's a puppy inside with Kruger. The response was instantaneous. Art's voice, usually so calm, was tight with urgency. On my way, Sarah. Do not enter. I repeat, do not enter. Just observe. Sarah couldn't look away. The puppy had flattened itself to the ground, a pitiful whine escaping its throat. Kruger was now just a few feet away, his body low, his movements fluid and deliberate. This was the stalk, the final moments before the inevitable violent end. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for a scream that would be torn from the puppy's throat. But it didn't come. When she dared to open her eyes again, the scene before her defied all logic, all instinct, all of her zoological training. Kruger was not attacking. He had stopped a foot from the puppy. His tufted ears were forward, not pinned back in aggression. His body was tense, but with curiosity, not predation. He extended his head slowly and with infinite gentleness nudged the trembling puppy with his nose. The puppy flinched, then let out another small whimper. Kruger nudged it again, a soft, inquisitive touch. He then did something Sarah had never seen him do before. He laid down, not in a crouch, ready to spring, but in a full relaxed posture, his fore stretched out in front of him, his head on the ground, placing himself at the puppy's level. He let out a low, chuffing sound, a noise bobcats sometimes used to communicate with their young. The puppy, seemingly responding to this universal language of non-aggression, crept forward, sniffed at Kruger's massive paw, then, gaining a sliver of courage, licked his nose. Kruger didn't flinch. He simply watched the small creature with those impossibly old whiskied eyes. After a moment, the exhausted, terrified puppy collapsed into a heap against the Bobcat's warm, furry side and fell asleep. Kruger laid his head down next to the pup, a silent, motionless guardian. By the time Art arrived, breathless and carrying a tranquilizer rifle he prayed he wouldn't have to use, he found Sarah staring, tears streaming down her face. "Art, you have to see this," she whispered, handing him the binoculars. Art raised them to his eyes, his knuckles white. He saw the scene. This impossible tableau of predator and prey, and a lifetime of wildlife management experience told him it was a fluke, a temporary ceasefire that could erupt into bloodshed at any second. "It's a miracle," Sarah breathed. "It's a time bomb," Art countered, his voice grim, though his heart was hammering with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. "Get Dr. Evans over here. We need to get that pup out." The attempt to intervene was a disaster. It was the moment that seared the heart-wrenching reality of the situation into the minds of everyone at the sanctuary. Following Art's orders, two of the most experienced handlers equipped with catchpoles and a carrier cautiously entered the habitat's secondary gate. The plan was simple. One handler would use a shield to gently nudge Kruger away while the other quickly scooped up the puppy. It was a procedure they had practiced 100 times for various scenarios. It had never gone so wrong. The moment the handlers set foot inside, Kruger was on his feet. The gentle, curious creature of moments before vanished, replaced by a snarling, protective fury Sarah had never witnessed. He didn't retreat. He placed his body squarely over the sleeping puppy, shielding it completely. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his chest, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. His lips peeled back to reveal formidable canines, and his ears flattened against his skull. When one of the handlers took a tentative step forward, Kruger swiped at the air with a clawed paw, a flash of deadly precision that left a deep gouge in the handler's protective shield. The message was unequivocal. "Stay back." The puppy, woken by the commotion, began to cry. Kruger immediately lowered his head and licked the puppy's face, a gesture of reassurance that was starkly contrasted by the menacing growl he continued to aim at the humans. "Art, pull them out," Sarah yelled from the platform. "He's going to hurt himself or them. He's protecting it." Art saw it too. Kruger wasn't just being territorial. It was something deeper, more personal. It was fiercely, undeniably paternal. With a heavy heart, he gave the order for the handlers to withdraw. As soon as the gate clicked shut, Kruger's aggression subsided. He nuzzled the puppy, calmed its whimpering, and then guided it with his head toward the sheltered safety of his men. A moment later, they both disappeared inside. The staff gathered in the sanctuary's small office, the air thick with tension and disbelief. Dr. Evans, a woman who trusted science above all else, paced back and forth. "This is untenable, Art," she stated, her arms crossed. "We can't leave a puppy in there. It's a violation of every protocol we have. The risk of disease transmission for one. We don't know what parasites or illnesses that pup is carrying. And more importantly, Kruger is a wild animal. His instincts could flip in a second. One wrong move from the puppy, one playful nip that's a little too hard, and Kruger's predatory drive could take over. We'd be responsible for that puppy's death. Everything she said was true. Was the logical, responsible, scientific viewpoint. Art knew it. He felt the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him. But then Sarah spoke, her voice thick with emotion. Did you see him, Doctor? Did you see his face? I've worked with Kruger for 5 years. I've never seen him connect with anything. He tolerates us. He endures his life here. But just now, he was alive. He had a purpose. He was protecting that puppy. He's adopted it. I know it sounds crazy, but he has. She turned to Art, her eyes pleading. And what about Kruger's mental health? He's been a ghost for years. This is the first time I've seen him look happy. If we take that puppy away, what will it do to him? The room fell silent. They were caught in an impossible dilemma. The safety of the puppy versus the well-being of the Bobcat. Protocol versus a miracle. Art leaned back in his creaky office chair, the wood groaning under the weight of his decision. He looked out the window at the distant sun-baked enclosure. He thought of Kruger's lonely silhouette on the rock day after day, year after year. He thought of the fierce, desperate protectiveness he had just witnessed. Wasn't the act of a mindless killer. Was the act of a father. We'll name the puppy Scout, he said quietly, his voice raspy. The others looked at him, stunned, because he somehow managed to scout out the one place, the one animal, in this entire valley that needed him the most. He looked from Dr. Evans's worried face to Sarah's hopeful one. We'll set up a 24/7 watch, a live video feed to this office. We'll have the vet team on standby. We'll do a remote fecal analysis on the pup as soon as we can. Get a sample test for everything under the sun. We'll prepare a specialized diet and find a way to deliver it so they both get what they need. We'll take every precaution imaginable. He took a deep breath. But for now, we let them be. We watch and we pray we're doing the right thing. The days that followed were a masterclass in unlikely tenderness. The story of Kruger and Scout became the sanctuary secret, a fragile bubble of wonder they protected fiercely. The live feed in Art's office became the most watched channel in the world for the small team. They watched, mesmerized, as an old, crippled bobcat taught a clumsy German shepherd puppy the ways of the wild. Kruger was an astonishingly patient father. He would let Scout clamber all over him, nipping at his tufted ears and batting at his bobbed tail. When the puppy's play became too rough, Kruger wouldn't retaliate with tooth or claw. He would simply pin Scout gently with a large paw, holding him until the puppy calmed down, then release him with a disciplinary lick on the nose. He taught Scout how to stalk a great lumbering German shepherd puppy. Trying to mimic the silent fluid grace of a bobcat was a sight of pure, heartwarming comedy. Scout would bunch up his hindquarters, wiggle his rear end with comical intensity, and then spring forward, landing with a loud, clumsy thud that would have scared off any real prey for miles. Kruger would watch with what looked suspiciously like amusement, then demonstrate again his own movements, a silent poem. In return, Scout taught Kruger how to play. He brought a joyous, boisterous energy to the quiet enclosure. He'd fetch sticks and drop them at Kruger's paws, looking up with expectant eyes until the bobcat, after much feigned indifference, would deign to bat the stick once or twice. He taught Kruger the uniquely canine language of the playbow, a signal the bobcat seemed to understand, and on rare occasions would even reciprocate with a clumsy version of his own. Their sleeping arrangement captivated everyone. Every night, without fail, they would curl up together in the den. The tiny puppy nestled against the bobcat's warm belly, rising and falling with his steady breath. As Scout grew, the positions changed, but the closeness remained. Soon, a lanky adolescent dog was spooning a full-grown bobcat. Scout's long leg draped protectively over Kruger's back. Dr. Evans's team managed to get the samples they needed. Miraculously, Scout was healthy, just a lost, hungry puppy who had likely wandered away from a nearby farm. They devised a clever feeding system with separate bowls that Kruger surprisingly respected, ensuring Scout got the high-protein puppy food he needed to grow. Scout transformed from a roly-poly puppy into a handsome, well-muscled young dog. A new reality began to set in. He was now significantly larger than his adoptive father. His youthful energy was boundless, while Kruger, entering his twilight years, was slowing down. The games of chase were more one-sided now, with Kruger often retiring to his rock to watch Scout's enthusiastic laps around the enclosure. The love was still there, visible in every shared glance and gentle nuzzle. But the sanctuary staff knew a difficult conversation was on the horizon. The San Pasqual Wildlife Sanctuary was no place for a large, healthy domestic dog to live out his life. It wasn't fair to him. He needed more space, more interaction with his own kind, and a purpose that went beyond being a bobcat's companion. The thought of separating them was a fresh wave of heartache for the staff, who had become so invested. It was Sarah who found the solution. Her grandmother had recently moved into a senior living facility called Golden Meadows. During a visit, Sarah had watched a therapy dog make its rounds, seeing firsthand the immense comfort and joy the animal brought to the elderly residents. She saw the way their faces lit up, how they would talk to the dog, stroking its fur, their loneliness and pain seeming to melt away for a few precious moments. And she thought of Scout. He had been raised with a quiet gentleness by the old, patient Kruger. He was used to moving slowly, to being a calm presence. He wasn't boisterous or jumpy like other young dogs. He had a deep well of empathy that seemed to flow from his improbable upbringing. He had learned the art of quiet companionship. She proposed the idea to Art, her voice trembling slightly. He's a therapy dog, Art. He's been in training for it his whole life. Without us even realizing it, he learned how to be gentle and comforting from Kruger. He could bring so much happiness to people. Art listened, his gaze fixed on the monitor where Scout, now a full-grown, magnificent dog, was resting his head on Kruger's flank. Separating them felt like tearing a single soul in two. But Sarah was right. Scout deserved a life of his own, a purpose, and the love he had received in this enclosure was too powerful to be contained. It needed to be shared. The director of Golden Meadows Senior Living, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Gable, was initially skeptical when she heard the story. A dog raised by a Bobcat. It sounded like a tabloid headline, but then Art and Sarah showed her the videos. They showed her Kruger's gentle grooming, Scout's patient companionship, the undeniable bond of love between two impossible friends. Mrs. Gable was moved to tears. She agreed to a trial visit. The day they took Scout from the enclosure was one of the hardest days in the sanctuary's history. There was no way to explain it to either animal. Scout whined in confusion as Sarah clipped a leash to his collar for the first time. Kruger paced frantically, his guttural cries echoing through the valley. It was a heart-wrenching sound, a cry of pure loss. As the van pulled away, Scout pressed his face against the rear window, his eyes locked on the frantic figure of the Bobcat growing smaller and smaller in the distance. The entire staff felt like villains. Scout's first few days at Golden Meadows were tentative. He was withdrawn, clearly, mourning his lost companion. He would lie by the door of his room, waiting. The residents were patient. They would sit with him, talking to him, not demanding anything. An elderly man, named George, a retired Army colonel who rarely spoke, began to visit him daily. He wouldn't try to pet Scout. He would just sit in a chair beside him and read the newspaper aloud. On the third day, Scout let out a deep sigh, got up, walked over to George, and rested his head on the old man's knee. George stopped reading and his wrinkled hand came down to stroke Scout's head. Single tear rolled down the colonel's cheek. From that moment on, Scout's true calling began. He wasn't just a dog. He was a conduit for the love he had been given. He seemed to have an innate sense of who needed him most. He would lie quietly at the feet of a woman grieving her late husband, offering a silent, warm presence. He would nudge his ball into the hand of a resident recovering from a stroke, encouraging gentle movement. He would sit patiently while a woman with Alzheimer's, who couldn't remember her own children's names, would tell him stories about a dog she had as a little girl, stroking his soft ears. He absorbed their loneliness, their pain, and their memories, and in return, he gave them the unconditional, non-judgmental love he had learned from a wild cat in the hills of San Pedro. He became the heart of Golden Meadows. But the story doesn't end there, because love like that doesn't end. It just changes shape. Art had made a promise to Sarah and to himself. Every Sunday, Sarah would drive the sanctuary's van to Golden Meadows. Scout, who now seemed to know the routine, would be waiting eagerly by the door, his tail thumping a joyous rhythm on the floor. He would hop into the van, and they would make the journey back to the dusty sanctuary, back to the place of his strange and wonderful puppyhood. The moment he was let out of the van, he would race towards the Bobcat habitat, and inside Kruger, who would have been waiting restlessly all morning, would be at the fence. When the gate was opened, the reunion would leave everyone who witnessed it in tears. Scout, the big, powerful German shepherd, would lower his head in deference, whining with happiness. Kruger, the aging Bobcat, would rub his face all over Scout's neck and chest, chuffing and purring with an intensity that vibrated through the air. They would fall into their old habits as if no time had passed. They'd walk the perimeter of the enclosure together, side by side. They'd lie down on the sun-drenched rock, Scout's large body, now a warm, protective barrier for the Old Bobcat who had once protected him. Art and Sarah would watch from the platform, their own eyes wet. They saw the truth before them. A love that defied species, defied logic, and defied expectations. They had taken a risk, a leap of faith based on a single impossible observation. They had chosen compassion over protocol, and the result was a ripple of warmth that had spread from a lonely bobcat to a lost puppy, and from that puppy to a community of lonely souls. Scout had found his purpose, bringing comfort to the elderly, paying forward the gentle love he had first received. And Kruger, in his final years, was no longer the lonely king in a gilded cage. Every Sunday his boy came home. He was a father, a friend, a mentor. He was loved. And in the quiet of the San Pascal Valley under the warm California sun, that was more than enough. It was everything.